Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. A slightly earlier start than we had scheduled, but that's okay. I hope everybody's keeping well. My name is Alan O'Mahony. I am the moderator of this interesting discussion today, and I work for Enterprise Ireland. Enterprise Ireland are the Irish Innovation and Trade Development Agency. I'm based in Dubai, and I work with a portfolio of Irish companies and help them to enter the market here in the Middle East, providing lots of tech solutions right across the mobility transportation space. So it's a pleasure to be here, and it's lovely to meet both Marwan and Ahmed, and hopefully we'll have one more speaker joining us very shortly. But maybe if we're going to kick off now, it would be good for the guys just to introduce yourselves and let everybody know what it is you're doing here today.
So I think for the current audience, we have already introduced ourselves, but maybe I'll make a quick reintroduction again. My name is Ahmed Hafez. I'm Regional Director of VIA. I'm based in Dubai. Quick introduction on VIA. So VIA is a US-based technology company. We were founded in 2013. I'll just try to add something to the previous introduction. Interesting story on how the company was conceived. So basically, our founders, they had some interesting idea on how to solve some of the public transport gaps in the city of New York. And they had this technology, this concept in mind. So they went to MTA proposing this idea to young PhD engineers working with supercomputers. And as you might expect, because this is a very traditional industry, they thought this is cute idea, but thank you very much. We will not consider it. So they decided at that time, that was in 2012. So they decided to take this technology, this idea, and create a product. So instead of the concept or the technology, decided to build a product, and then they have built VIA. And they've provided, they started the concept of on-demand transportation for public transportation in the city of New York, covering just, I think it was between Street 35 and 42, where they have noticed this gap in public transportation. Today, when I joined the company 3.5 years ago, we were present only in 20 cities. The concept of having an app to use public transportation, on-demand public transportation, was something that was only present in the US, in certain European countries. Today, we are present in more than 550 cities. We're present, we operate in Dubai. As I mentioned before, we provide the technology to public transit agencies. So we don't provide the solution ourselves. So you won't find a solution called VIA. It's a technology that is powering the end product. So we are in Dubai under the name Dubai Bus on Demand, that is run by RTA. We are in Abu Dhabi under the name Abu Dhabi Link, that is run by ITC. We are also in Ajman, in Saudi Arabia, in Doha, and several other cities to come. Yeah, thank you. Please.
I'll continue the chit-chat mode until
sure.
he arrives.
As you wish.
You had a story.
The story, yeah. So I'm Marwan Hussein, researcher at UITP. Like I said before, just shortly, we consider ourselves to be similar to the United Nations of the public transport sector. It's a membership-based organization, non-profit, there since 1885, so really ancient. All the governments, companies, suppliers, OEMs, everyone is member, and I'm based in Dubai. So a story that I mentioned earlier is how I got into transport while Ahmed was here. How many of you have not been to Egypt? Okay. Okay, great. So the reason why I got into transport, I used to work in the automotive sector, and working in Cairo, you know, Cairo is has really one of the worst traffic jams all over the world. And I used to live in the maximum northeast, going to the maximum southwest. The average distance is, I'd say, 40 kilometers, can reach up to 70 if all the roads are blocked. But I spent 2 hours in one way. So 4 hours in total, spent in the traffic, not moving, inhaling CO2, and wasting time, completely inefficient. And I woke up one day, I decided I can't do this anymore. I'm gonna do my master's and try and focus on public transport, and here I am. So this is a short story how I went into public transport. But maybe just a leading sentence, and then I'll give it back to you, is public transport is something that has been touched relatively a little less than average here since I've came, but I'm very happy that this platform actually exists because all of us can talk about this openly. You've had some questions from the audience. Where is public transport? What do you offer and why it doesn't happen, etc. So what I can tell you about this is that public transport itself is changing. It's no longer just a bus, metro, and taxi. It now includes mass mobility as a service. It includes e-bikes, smarter mobility solutions, and includes basically everything other than a private car. So shared cars, ride-hailing, everything you can think of. And this is the only solution forward. And there's a very nice picture of, like cars, traffic jam. If you take all the cars out and you replace them with Teslas or electric vehicles, you'd still have the same problem. So the only solution to creating a better city, having a healthier city, is public transport. And yeah, so public transport fanatic. I'll give it back to you.
Okay, thanks guys. And I think Cairo, in my experience, takes the biscuit for probably being the most congested place I'd say I've ever been. I remember all I could think about at the time was if I had a heart attack now, or if I die, or if I had something happen to me now, I'm dead, because there's no way I'm going to make it to a hospital. But it just goes to show, and it highlights the issue, and it's not just a problem in Egypt, it's a problem everywhere. And I think governments and policymakers have really, are trying to adopt these new measures, trying to implement electric solutions within their public transport fleets. In terms of the MENA region, where do you think things are at the moment? Like, give us an overview of the current status.
It's to me.
Maybe Marwan, yeah.
Okay. There's a lot happening. Let me start with electric buses, because this is what I'm really passionate about, and I think this is what most of you want to hear. So there's a lot that's been happening on the electric bus front. Relatively less obviously compared to the other nations like the EU or the America or Australia and Asia, but pilots have been happening all over the Middle East. Now we're in a very exciting time where governments, authorities, and operators decide, okay, let's have a little bus to play with just to test and see how this is going to work for us. So let me start from Morocco. Morocco has done a great job in integrating a solar station, actually, 1 megawatt, and creating an electric BRT system. Some operational problems, but it exists, and they have, I think, up to 10 buses on the ground. Tunisia has got 1 electric bus to pilot that has been completed, I think, last year or 2 years ago. Egypt has 15 K9 BYDs in Alexandria, 13 on the road, operating, doing a great job. Some in Cairo, but still in the test pilot, also I think Chinese brands. Jordan has ordered part of 150 buses, have ordered 15 electric buses. We've seen here in Dubai, and obviously Abu Dhabi Masdar is one of the first electric buses in the GCC a couple of years back, and now we have one in RTA in Dubai, in La Mer. So everyone is starting slowly to go into the direction of electric buses, just getting a bus and playing with it, seeing how does it work with the heat, with the conditions, etc. And I think this is a start towards the transitioning to electrifying public transport. We can see other modes. We have other modes that have been very successful, mostly first last mile solutions, the scooters, the e-bikes that you can see in Abu Dhabi and Dubai and in other cities all over MENA. Slowly, we're transitioning towards finding innovative solutions, cleaner solutions, better solutions. We're not there yet, but this is the start. And I think places like this, we can show this and highlight this. So,
Okay.
yeah.
And Ahmed, in your role with VIA, as a technology provider into this space, how does the electric bus model fit into your current plans, and how do you think it's going to progress over the next kind of couple of years?
Great. So first, I'm very happy that we are combining the discussion on electric buses with public transportation. As Marwan just said, sometimes the electrification ideas and even budgets that are poured into electric vehicles are taken from public transportation, and as you just mentioned, it solves some of the problems, but it doesn't solve the congestion problem. If we replace all the vehicles, conventional vehicles with electric vehicles, you still have to build roads, you still have to build the infrastructure. So the best solution would be to think of electrification, but also to combine it on how can we attract people to shared transportation or public transportation so that they can leave their private vehicles. Using electric vehicles on-demand solution is a bit more complex than using it for like conventional public transportation. We know the bus has, as I mentioned, fixed route, fixed stops. There is an anticipation on the mileage that is going to be spent every day. You can plan on this, whereas on the on-demand transportation, it's really up to demand that we're having real time. So the expectation on the mileage might not be fixed every day. So that's something that we will have to incorporate into our algorithm. So basically, as I mentioned, for on-demand public transportation, you don't have the fixed route and the fixed stops. You basically have a pool of vans or vehicles, shuttles, and you have thousands of people requesting rides at the same time. And what happens in the back end is the algorithm trying to assign the best vehicle to each of these persons so that we aggregate as much people as possible in the same vehicle with the condition that they would be all going in one direction, in the same direction. So nobody is going out of, so people would be sitting inside the bus, they feel that they are sitting in a taxi because they're sharing the bus with other people that are going their direction. Obviously now the level of complexity that we add to the problem is that we don't know what is the expected mileage for each bus. So maybe this bus would do 200 kilometers today, another bus would do 400, 500 kilometers a day. So we need to incorporate this into the algorithm as well. Not only the charging locations or the telematics to access the batteries and to understand the level of power remaining in each of these vehicles so that you don't send, for example, buses with very low battery into long trips. That's also something that we need to consider, but also to build the shift of the public transportation shifts. It's built on shifts. Shift is a vehicle and a driver. The driver has 8-9 hour shift. You need to make sure that you match this with that so that we don't lose or you don't have downtime during the day. So basically, we, of course, as a provider of on-demand transport, we encourage having electric vehicles and we incorporate these extra parameters into our algorithm to be able to manage the total environment. We currently have some mix, a lot of hybrid services that has conventional vehicles, have electric vehicles, but also autonomous vehicles as well. And that's the idea of having like a brain in the back end that is managing the whole transportation network.
And Ahmed, just sticking with technology for a second.
Yep.
How is are you seeing many exciting startups in this space, or is this space still as well funded as it was maybe before COVID, you know, in the last 2 to 3 years? What's happening in that space?
So Actually, like everybody in the transportation sector, especially the startups, were a bit worried during COVID. But there were actually some silver lining that happened to us because we were able to get into, let's say, a couple of problems with conventional transportation. So some of the cities wanted to limit the capacity of like most of the cities were limiting the capacity on the buses. And this means that they're not allowing walk-ins in the bus. You need to have specific seats, and not all the seats of the bus are available, which means that you might be waiting at the bus stop, waiting for a bus. There is no place for you, so you'll have to wait for the coming bus, and you might not have space on that bus as well. So some of the transit agencies started to do is that they would introduce a layer of technology so that you book a seat on the bus. And that actually allows us to start working with those transit agencies that were basically mainly focusing on conventional transportation into introducing on-demand transportation as well. So it came like nothing, we shouldn't say anything good came from COVID, but that was actually, it represented an opportunity for transportation startups to have a stronger presence within the traditional transit agencies.
Okay. And Marwan, from a policy perspective then, has the effects of COVID, has that been a positive or a negative, do you think, for the whole narrative around pushing and advancing electrification within public transport?
Well, I can say both, definitely. There is a silver lining. Of course, COVID was brutal, but definitely there was a silver lining. I think all of us know the negative impacts, but yeah, definitely for the transport sector, it was like there were a lot of companies and a lot of places that couldn't even survive what has happened during COVID. But for those who were able to, there was a silver lining for us as citizens to see there was no pollution. Like during lockdown, I think if you'd look out the window, you could see that the cities were cleaner, better, emptier, and much better to breathe. The air was cleaner to breathe, and it was a much better experience. So this is a silver lining that I can assure you was from the pandemic. And this is what motivated governments to look, so why don't we talk about electric buses or first last mile solutions? We've seen a very, very huge shift, like you've mentioned, this shift to the smart mobility solutions such as e-bikes, e-scooters. That wasn't there before before COVID. So we're seeing a huge transition towards the cleaner mobility solutions, but for governments and policies that you mentioned is, why are we doing this? Paris Agreement, NDCs, I don't want to go into all these technical matters, but the governments realize that we can do it in a better way and we can do it cleaner. I'll give it back to you so you can welcome Ahmed.
So I'm late.
No problem. So we have our final panelist here who's made it, and thanks for coming, Ali. Very quickly, do you want to maybe give a quick introduction to yourself and to Vault Lines, and maybe give us an update what's happening there?
Yeah, sure. The mic is working, right?
Yeah.
So thank you so much for having me, and apologies for the delay. It's quite a packed schedule. So my name is Ali Halabi. I'm originally from Beirut. I moved to Turkey 10 years ago during an assignment, and I fell in love with Istanbul. It's an amazing city. It's a massive city. Back then it was 14 million. Now it's home for 20 million people, and I realized that it could be the bedrock of innovation in mobility and transportation. And I became obsessed with mobility and transportation myself. And in 2014, I started my first startup in mobility. It was an on-demand carpooling app. And then in 2018, I started Vault Lines. So that's exactly 4 years ago in April of 2018. And in April of 2022, just a month ago, we got acquired by Swivel. Which is thank you, which is headquartered here in Dubai. So I'm coming quite frequently to Dubai, and yeah, that's pretty much the gist of it.
Sure. And do you want to tell us then what are the plans for Vault Lines moving forward with the acquisition now?
Yeah, absolutely. So Vault Lines, just a bit on Vault Lines. Vault Lines is a smart mobility. It's a smart corporate mobility solution, right? And the name of the company So basically, we offer corporate shared mobility. So we focus a lot on corporates. We focus on institutions, organizations of any shape or form that wants to offer an alternative to transportation, to public transportation, and to on-demand car ownership, taxis, etc. So we call our model the missing middle, where we use 16-seater buses in a much more efficient way. And connecting all of these buses to the Voltline's algorithm creates a kind of like a alternative semi-public transportation network that sits between public transit and on-demand or car ownership. And the brand's name is, Voltlines. Volt represents the electric vision of we want to electrify all of this network. By 2030, we don't want to only electrify it, but we want to make sure that it's carbon neutral, so zero emissions by 2030. And the lines part represents how our business model creates express lines between residential areas and business areas. So basically what Voltlines does is we create express lines between residential hubs and business hubs, right? Whereby people that work in different companies in the same area, it could be, for example, Almaria Island, where different people work in the same area in different companies, but they live in also different areas. So what we do is we create express lines between, let's say, Al Sadiyat, or let's say Al Manara, or let's say, any Al Munira, sorry, any specific residential area where we pick up 12, 13 people, drop them off in the same business district. They could be working at 12, 13 different companies. So that's really what Voltlines does in a nutshell.
Okay, very good. And we've mentioned about different cities and cities that are densely populated. Yeah. Places like Cairo, like Istanbul. They're obviously in contrast to Dubai, Abu Dhabi, maybe not so densely populated, and plenty of space to develop. Where do you think it's easier to implement electrification of public transport? What are the differences between the high density cities and the less dense cities?
I would argue that it's actually easier in the less dense cities to innovate faster, because in high density cities you have legacy systems and you have legacy infrastructure, whereby in low density cities you're able to kind of like leapfrog a lot of the infrastructure that older cities might have. So I would really argue that I think Dubai and Abu Dhabi are could be at the forefront of this. And we have also an entity here in Abu Dhabi. I live in Abu Dhabi, so I can see that Abu Dhabi could be at the forefront of it. And I know with VIA there's the links
Abu Dhabi Link
project. So this is an example of this is an innovative solution to like low density areas where a fixed city line doesn't really make sense. Okay. Whereby you innovate with on demand or semi on demand, and from there these assets are much easier to electrify versus a legacy system that is stuck in financing deals and stuck in a lot of other things.
Sure. So maybe to the other panelists then, you mentioned infrastructure there. What needs to happen to make an electric bus fleet for public transport a viable option? Who are the main players there?
Okay. I'll pick up on what Ali said just to continue. I think most of the countries have the same problems. It's a new technology, and I think all over, throughout the last couple of days, we've talked about, we need support from the government, policies, etc., etc. But I think what we fail to see is that, let's take, I'll give you just an example of, and back to what you mentioned for countries that are leapfrogging, etc. Dubai has completed its first electric bus pilot a couple of weeks back. And just to establish this pilot, they had to sit down with 14 different stakeholders. Now, you can imagine in normal standard operations, just transport operations, you have an operator and the government, and that's it. But now you have energy providers, you have charging providers, infrastructure, safety, the developer, the owner of the land. So you have so many new stakeholders that are part of the table. So the advisable thing, and this is what we're trying to do at UITP, is not to look at the bus as a vehicle. You're looking at the electric bus as a system. You need to adapt a systems approach. This systems approach includes so many new layers and not only stakeholders, but even the technology. Like our previous speaker was talking about, how do I even choose the right technology? No. Whether it's the charging technology, do I need a battery electric bus or is a trolley electric bus better? Should I do a hybrid solution? So all these new questions are asked, and it changes everything. Like the question is not how can we do it, but what is actually, like, how do I think how to do it, you know? We need to change the whole framework of thinking. But it's getting there with government support. I think obviously the government needs to set down the framework. What we see happening in Europe and the mass adoption of electric transit in general, electric buses specifically, is that you have goals, climate goals. We have the Paris Agreement, we have the NDCs, the nationally determined contributions, in which each country says, listen, I'm going to reduce CO2 emissions by this and that much. By 2030, let's say I'll have half of my fleet electric. Those targets, and then how will I achieve those targets? I'm going to buy 100 electric buses every year, or I'm going to replace 50 ICE vehicles every year. However, every entity, authority, city, municipality needs to decide and have a clear objective and goal for that. So that's how you move forward.
No, I think it's very interesting, and you know, in terms of the panel and the experts that we have here, Ali, I'll say that you're the entrepreneur, Marwan the researcher, and Ahmed the innovator. In terms of, you know, your engagement, your experience in dealing with the public transport agencies and trying to advance that innovation and embed innovation within agencies that might be seen as, you know, traditionally maybe set in their ways, or how have you found that in terms of your own experience? Feel free to answer in whichever order.
Go ahead, start.
For Volt lines, it's more given the fact that we work more with corporates. Corporates are usually, and especially, you know, there are subsegments of corporates. So, you know, you would see multinationals or technology companies or technoparks. For example, 23% of our Turkish revenue comes from technology parks. So these are technology innovation centers in Ankara, in the capital, as well as in Istanbul. And these guys are usually more, you know, more open to innovation, more open to different types of mobility solutions. But when it comes to public transit agencies, etc., we had a very short-lived experience in the UAE before the acquisition, before we got acquired. But I think Ahmed is in a much better position to, given VIA's involvement in both Dubai and Abu Dhabi.
Sure.
So, as I mentioned a bit earlier, when we came to the region 3.5 years ago, the company was actually since it was founded, it was focused on the US market that seemed to be the most innovative market in terms of transportation. They were open to new types of solutions. And I'm sure at that time, like Middle East was not on the agenda at all. When they moved from the US, they moved to Western Europe, to Germany, to France, to England, some of the countries that are known for their very strong infrastructure of public transportation. I remember when I met the CEO of VIA in 2017, 2018, before I joined, he asked me, do you think that could work in the Middle East? Like, you guys have even the metro is not Israeli, it's Dubai and it's Cairo, like very few cities. Do you think it's worth like doing this with the public transit agencies and in the Middle East? And my view, knowing how ambitious the Gulf countries are and how like they have a very strong force that moves their agenda forward. I thought that, okay, maybe there are certain countries in North Africa that are maybe in need of this kind of solution to solve the problems of public transportation, but then we are a private company, we are a startup, we have to be practical. Bureaucracy might not allow us to move like forward. So I decided to focus on the Gulf. And I thought of UAE, Qatar, Saudi as these, like the three main countries to start with. And as we expected, the ambition, the need, it's a very traditional industry. The public transport industry, it's with all the technologies that are changing, but the mindset, like with all my due respect, but it's the same for like 50 years. So to introduce, and it's built on scheduling and routes and stops and everything. And then when you come and you say there is no scheduling, like there is no routes, there are no stops, and you are introducing a completely, like some of the officials told me this is chaotic. Like this is not public transportation. It's very chaotic. But the main idea, like how we convince them, is that we need to change. Like we need to bring new users to the public transport users. You want to, I believe public transportation should not always be subsidized for everyone. It should be built to be the best, and then you can subsidize it to the people who need to be subsidized for. But in general, focusing on some of the problems, like in Dubai, for example, when we started our operation in the UAE, the main problem that we were trying to solve, first and last mile. And I think the gentleman mentioned here that why they're not using the metro. In Dubai, honestly, if you are not living next to the metro and your office is next to a metro stop, there is no use like for using the metro on a daily basis. Like first and last mile is not there. And this is where we started to focus, where we thought that on-demand transportation is not there to replace fixed route, but just to make the public transportation network more attractive to attract new users. As Ali mentioned, in Abu Dhabi, it's a different case where we operate in a massive area that has low density of population. It was so inefficient to have those fixed routes just going around all day, just carrying hot air. Nobody's there. Maybe by chance we see one person sitting. But there is a mandate to have public transportation. So when we replace 20 buses in the area of El Shahama here in Abu Dhabi by just 10 shuttles with on-demand, the ridership, not only that you bring efficiency, but the number of riders, it grew just in 3 months, 10x. So 10x of the people who were using the public transportation before and after, just because of convenience. Mm. And I think this is, but you need a government that, if I may say, that thinks like private sector, that would take a decision, that would take an action, and that would go for it.
Sure. And I think that the governments in this part of the world, particularly in the Gulf, are very future focused. You can see that from a lot of the strategies that they've implemented and that they want to implement over the next maybe 5 to 10 years, particularly around autonomous transportation. Qatar, I think, have a target of 25% of their bus fleet. They want to be electric in time for the World Cup, which is at the end of this year. So that's happening very quickly. You know, and there are some, it seems like there is headway being made here in this part of the world. Is there any other parts of the world where you think the whole advancement to electrification has worked really well, and what can be taken, I suppose, from those parts of the world, and you know, and that type of knowledge being shared here, and what could be implemented here? Maybe Marwan to.
Sure, definitely. So there's one really famous international case study of complete 100% electrification of the entire public transport fleet, buses and taxis. Exactly, Shenzhen in China. So Shenzhen has been a case study for everyone who is in the public transport sector looking to electrify more than hundreds. I think it was a couple of thousand, can't remember exactly the exact number.
The total city is 16,000 vehicles, including the taxi fleet.
Exactly.
And it's all connected on a mega screen that tracks everything. It's incredible.
It's so this is one city that is still being studied up until today, and each and every authority, operator, supplier, OEM, whoever, looks at the city as a model, really. But the question would be, you know, is this how, like, it is not really a model solution, you know? Every country, every city has very different conditions. Like I mentioned before, here, battery electric buses might be suitable, but then I might need to change the charging solution. Then there's the question of hydrogen. Should I actually wait for hydrogen or just jump to electric? Some would say, just wait for hydrogen. You know, there are so many questions that are popping up, but I think one big question is, one big question would be, how do I make it happen? This is where we go back maybe to the silver lining of the pandemic, and I'd say that the governments realized that we can actually do it in a better and cleaner way. And just the fact that we have governments piloting buses is the first step. I would say that I can share with you maybe that the buses in Dubai, the electric buses that have been piloted with the opportunity charging, they found out that maybe during the sandstorms, it requires much more cleaning than before. Maybe this is not optimal. Maybe we need to change our thinking. Some say that, you know, the weather conditions in the GCC are not suitable. In the Middle East, it's a bit too hot. But I go back and say, no, there are actually electric buses in India working on the ground. And even in Europe, the energy that is used for the heating, that will be used for the AC. So the technology is evolving every day, literally. A couple of years back, we'd had big manufacturers that say, we're not ready to deploy our electric buses in the Middle East. But now they say, come on, we're ready. We've studied the conditions the past 3 years, and we're ready to go. So it keeps on evolving literally every day. And as you can see, every day there's something new.
Sure. One piece, and look, I think everybody's quite aware of what the benefits are of implementing EVs, you know, in terms of having a cleaner environment, maybe more convenient when we talk about the on-demand solutions that are now available, that it's providing just a better, cleaner service. But I was trying to think when I was on my way here to the event, are there any arguments for not moving to electric? I know this might be an interesting one for people to, but is there people that are trying to, you know, what is there blockers there, or is there any argument or valid arguments on the other side of the discussion to say that maybe ICE, you know, internal combustion engines is the way to, you know, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
It's pretty broke.
I can start if you like. So as Marwan mentioned, the technology is evolving very fast. So I don't think there would be an argument not to have a green solution or not to have a safe solution, but maybe we don't agree what is really green right now, or what is greener, or maybe we're reducing pollution at the point of operation, but at the point of manufacturing, we're not doing that. So these could be all arguments, very valid arguments. But as a goal, I don't think there is a lot of debate around that. From an on-demand perspective, for example, it's not yet for us the best timing for that. Basically because the availability of the vehicles. So as you can see, there are buses that are very mature, commercial vehicles, very mature. But when you look at on-demand transport, you look at a mid-size vehicle that is like 8 to 14 seaters. In that range, the options are not exactly the same. So and that's basically one of the reasons we think like some of the deployments that we have, like we don't have enough electric vehicles in our deployment as we would wish to have. One other point from a vehicle perspective, you see a lot of conventional vehicle converted into electric vehicles. However, if you design much fewer options of companies that are built on being vehicle, like Tesla, for example, or Rivian on the other hand. When you think of designing an electric vehicles, you might consider a lot of change of design in the layout, in increasing the capacity of the vehicles, because actually you have more capacity that can use this for the same size of the vehicle. So I think with time, the things will be developing. Governments are not, or should not, they have other goals other than commercial goals. So there is environmental pressure on government that is pushing this agenda forward, and we are seeing these like very impressive deadlines to reach a very high percentage of the fleet and mobility in the country. We have this in Dubai. We heard also about Qatar, but we have one thing, but also running cost is much cheaper as compared to the initial cost, which is higher, the charging infrastructure. I think these are problems that we will keep solving one by one, but most of the stakeholders have their eyes set on the same goal at the end of the way.
Yeah, it's a price point problem for our category. We use 16-seater buses in Turkey. So today we operate in Istanbul and Ankara 400 buses.
Okay.
So these are 400 buses moving daily, every day. And the price point for us is the biggest blocker right now. I mean, for us, it's embarrassing that our name is Voltlines and we don't have electric buses yet. We were hoping that by our 4th year, the price point would come to a more realistic level, but it's still today versus an ICE, it's 3x. If we're talking about like a Mercedes Sprinter or a Volkswagen Crafter, the e-Crafter or the e-Sprinters are 3x what our category needs. BYD doesn't yet produce the configuration that we ideally, I think both companies use similar configurations. VIA is more on the 8 to 14 configuration, we're on the 16 configuration. But absolutely, I mean, I think there's nothing else except for the initial price points, which the argument is the running cost is much lower, right? And I totally get that, but when you factor in the infrastructure investment and whether the infrastructure is provided and ready by the cities themselves, this is where I feel like the tipping point will be. The minute the infrastructure is available, then the math becomes much easier to say, yes, you have a higher upfront cost, but you have a lower running cost, and the break-even point would be on the 4th year, let's say.
Sure. Yeah, and I think in terms of maintenance, I think that's an area as well where electric buses might have a
absolutely
have an advantage.
Absolutely. Like what's the number? I think it was like 800 parts versus 12,000 parts that in an electric versus an ICE. So absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
So interested in some of the pieces that you were talking about there about yourself and Ahmed. What role do you think data has to play? Obviously, as tech solutions now, you're capturing a lot of data, which it's the key really to helping cement or solidify your argument or your approach with public transport agencies and with other providers. How important do you think the role of data is in this whole transition to electrification?
For us, what data allows us to do is it allows us to create this shared network. So for us, it's heavily focused on the shared mobility, and the increase of sharing. And I think it's the same for Ahmed in VIA, because VIA's argument is that, listen, I increase ridership, right? And I've seen the Abu Dhabi example, which is a great example, where 10 smaller buses replaced 20 bigger buses and yet created more ridership. And we see the same exact thing in occupancy for Voltlines, whereby if each company in our business model, if each corporate is renting its own buses to transport its own employees, with us, what they do is they buy a monthly subscription per employee. So we call ourselves the Netflix of transportation, in the sense that you buy a monthly subscription, and with that subscription, you use a network of buses, right?
Okay.
So that increases utilization, first of all, it increases the vehicle utilization, and on a certain trip, it increases the occupancy. And both of these are economic, they translate into economical benefits that justify or make it more affordable to do the transition, the leap into a higher entry point in terms of a price and a lower running cost. So I believe, and this is my personal approach in Volt Lines, that sharing and increased ridership and increased utilization and increased occupancy is key to get us to electrification, because it gives the economical support to get there.
Yeah. Do you have anything to add on that? In terms of data, from a policy perspective?
Definitely. I was thinking from a policy perspective, so there's one big approach that is basically in the direction of what you said. It's called ASI, Avoid, Shift, Improve. This framework is basically saying avoid the use of private car as much as you can, reduce the need for energy, shift to cleaner, better, more efficient modes from the supply side, basically, and then improve from the demand side. So this whole framework is what is coming out of the Paris Agreement. Next to it, you have something called the Sustainable Urban Transport Policies, Plans, SUTP. So this is a different approach than the standard traditional road planning or traffic planning. You're looking at including interdisciplinary people from other approaches, not only traffic engineers. We're not looking at roads alone anymore. We're not looking at modality. We're looking at multimodality. We're looking at new layers of public transport specifically. But I don't know, there's a lot that can be said. What I can tell you is there's one policy paper that we published 2 years ago, specifically on electric buses, in which we look at the policies that were done by the EU. The EU has been doing a lot of work on the environmental side, trying to get these policies into clear goals, targets, objectives for operators, for authorities, for municipalities. And it's available on our website, and it talks about why do we do it, how do we do it, and what is the best way. So that's maybe a good link for the audience to check. Back to you.
Okay. I think we only have a couple of minutes left according to this clock. So maybe we can ask a couple of questions at the end just before we wrap up, if any of the audience has any questions for our guests. Just hold your thoughts for 1 second. In terms of, we're sitting now in 2022, we are making great strides in this whole area. What are your predictions for the region within the whole space of public transport? How do you think it's going to, what's it going to look like in 2030?
Oh, interesting. You're the expert.
How will it look in 2030? I think, like I mentioned before, the pilots are going to increase, and we're going to slowly see a maturity moving from just pilots out of political will just to try. We're going to see a lot of lessons learned. We're going to see a lot of hiccups, a lot of problems, a lot of good failures, I call them.
Yeah, would create innovation.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Creative destruction. Sean-Peter was always right. Things will continue improving, and the technology will continue to be suitable for us here in the region. We will see much more supply, much more modes that are suitable to us, and we will get there. 2030, I think, might be a bit too soon, but maybe 2040 or 2050, we will see more than 75% electrification, I'd say.
Okay.
I think by then, at least we will have the passenger train across the Emirates operational by then. And maybe that would allow me to come here today not driving.
Absolutely. I think this will be key to multimodality. I feel it in Turkey, because sometimes I go to Ankara without even touching my car.
Exactly. Exactly. So the train, that's like spot on. The train actually would help, I think, in my opinion, that would help public transportation within the Emirates once you have them connected with, I'm sure, the nice thing about this region that maybe we think that 2030 is very close, but it's just 8 years, and there is a lot that could be done in 8 years. I'm sure you've heard of NEOM in Saudi Arabia, where they are launching, hopefully by 2025, a city that doesn't have street, not a car, not street. So very interesting to see that. I think really by then, and we will have the metro in Abu Dhabi, we will have the train across the Emirates, we will have first and last mile that is covering all those cities to allow people to have better access to public transportation. Better to be on electric vehicles, of course, but at least the concept would be there.
Okay, very interesting. I think, yeah, there's a lot of these, what seem maybe right now like crazy ideas, but it's very quickly that people are thinking, wow, it's actually, you know, it's not that far away from becoming reality. So it's a very interesting space to watch. And maybe just before we finish up, does anybody, I saw a few hands, would you like to ask a question? I'm not sure if there's a mic.
Yeah, there is one.
Sure.
Okay, I wrote it down so I remember. Thank you so much. What a wonderful presentation. My name is Dima. I'm an urban planner. My question is actually for Mr. Ali. Your initiative sounds quite intriguing. I know where you come from in the sense that I've never been to Turkey either, but I come from Canada and I never use the car, so I do have access to a vehicle, but I always use transit. I know it's early days in your business in a way that you're looking into corporate sort of the landscape in terms of making sure you take them from where, you know, from places where they work to places where they live. In the context of MENA region, specifically here in Abu Dhabi or even in Dubai, do you see yourself expanding a little bit more into the development industry, like in terms of not just the corporate landscape, but also the people who live in larger residential developments, whether they're high-rises, you know, villas, whatever. Do you see something in that nature?
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so the thing about the Volt Lines network that we built in Turkey. It's think of it as like each company was renting its own buses, and we used that as a stepping stone. So there was already like a built-in subsidy where corporates were subsidizing the transport, right? So we kind of piggybacked on that and turned it into a shared network, right? So that's the starting of it. Actually, what happened in the pandemic is in July 2020, we realized that there's going to be this new trend of hybrid work. So what we built is we built another layer on the network called DRT. It's slightly different than what DRT is for VIA, but for us, it's basically a reservation system where it's a semi-on-demand, whereby the demand comes in, and what the app does is it either routes it to the network, so it tells this person that lives in a residential area and wants to go to a business area that, hey, there is a Volt Lines line that you can jump on. Or if they don't find, they could dispatch a bus 1 day in advance. So we do dispatch buses to fulfill that demand because for us, the SLA is 100% SLA. It's not a best effort. So that's the second layer in the Volt Lines network. Now, the third layer that we plan to launch is a B2c layer, whereas it's not only, so our first two layers are considered as B2B2C, because we do the deal with the corporate and then the employees of the corporate use it as a, so what we're doing right now is launching a B2C next year, whereby any person can just open the app and then use it. And what residential developments would end up being, they would be a channel of like a promo channel or a growth channel on the B2C layer, but it's all using the same network. So that's the build up. It takes years. It's not easy, but we'll be continuing to do that in Turkey under Swivel. But now we're taking this model to Egypt under Swivel to launch it in Egypt and in Argentina and in Mexico. So these are the 4 cities in which we will be doing that approach.
Anybody else? Any other questions? Yeah, if you want to use the microphone.
Hi, my name is Aslam, and I'm a researcher. Well, just as many cars as you see over here, we have so many ICE cars as well. New ones coming in year by year, month by month. We have new cars coming in. So where do you see, even for the public transports, I think it's the same. We don't have all electric vehicles being manufactured now. We have the regular ICE engines as well. So how do you see the transition is going to happen? When do they start reducing production of the ICE cars? When do they start increasing the production of EV cars? Even if not increase in the EV cars, at least the reduction in the ICE cars. That's how I think it's the sustainable mobility is going to take the step towards electric mobility more.
I know, I'll let the experts talk about this one, but I know from an Irish perspective, Ireland has committed to phasing out new ICE cars being sold in Ireland by 2030. So after 2030, they don't want any new combustion engine vehicles being sold in Ireland. So I think from that point, it definitely has to come from a governmental place, a policy position that, maybe in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goals, that this is where we want to be in an amount of time, and then it's up to the other stakeholders within the ecosystem to fall in line underneath that. But maybe some of the
absolutely. I mean, personally, I think this is the starting point. Like, it has to come from the top, right? Because if you leave it as is, there's a lot of supply chain efficiencies built into the production of the ICE cars or ICE vehicles, right? So it's extremely difficult to make that transition unless you're motivated by either a consumer behavior change, which I think is starting to show up. I mean, there are now love brands in the industry. I'm talking about like individual vehicles such as Tesla, but also like BMW right now with their iX50. It's an incredible replacement of the X5, whereby they did not retrofit the X5, which wouldn't have been efficient. They've completely built a new platform from the ground up, and it's an impressive car. I know it's a car that's hated by some. The design language is a bit over the top, but it's an incredible car. So it comes from the top, I believe, from governments setting deadlines, and these deadlines will start trickling down on the supply chain and on everything that eventually will reach that tipping point where even for the manufacturers and even for countries that did not set such targets, they'll find themselves being forced to get and import electric vehicles because the supply chain has shifted. And I think, like this 10, 15 years timeline is a good framework to work on to make that transition.
Yeah, maybe I'll add to that. I think most of the OEMs already have presented or highlighted some targets to completely phase out of ICEs. Not everyone, but I'd say most. Volvo, BMW, Mercedes, Opel, Porsche, everyone literally has highlighted at least a partial phase out, or let's say by 2050, most of them won't really manufacture any ICEs anymore. And this applies to all other OEMs, not only private cars, but also like buses specifically. And this is, like Ali said, motivated by the government's targets, which say by 2030, I'll have at least 30% of my fleet electric or whatsoever. And trickling down from that, they're offering kind of opportunities, funding, incentives for us as buyers in some countries, in European countries. If you buy an electric car, we'll give you a discount or we'll give you a subsidy. In Dubai, you could charge your electric car up until the beginning of this year completely free. So if you had the Tesla, you don't need to pay for electricity. So you find all of these incentives to incentivize the user, demand side, but also the supply side. Slowly, it's happening. It's just a matter of time for the region to catch up with the world, I think.
In addition to this, I would add consumer awareness that is growing, and that I think that it could accelerate things moving. There are a lot that is happening from the top, but I think the push is also coming from the consumer themselves. I'll give you an example of a service that we have in Berlin in partnership with BVG. the focus of that service was people who own private vehicles. So it's an on-demand service that is mainly built for people who have private vehicles. And during the planning of the project, we realized that a lot of these users have electric vehicles or hybrid vehicles. And that's why one of the main like necessities that we said that we're going to have in this deployment, that at least 50% of the fleet would be electric vehicles. So it's based basically on vans, Mercedes vans, and we have more than 250 vehicles. More than half of them are electric vehicles. And when we're doing the surveys after the service, like one of the reasons that attracted people to leave their car and use the service because they thought that they are doing something that is environmentally cautious. So they went to that service and they left their car because they thought that this is actually kind of green service. So the consumer influence, I think, will play a key role. And it's interesting to see, like in the US, they fund, like there are programs to fund, like subsidize part of the price of the vehicles in order to encourage you to get electric vehicles. It's very impressive to see people buying electric vehicles in this part of the world with no like any incentives other than the electricity part, but they're still buying more than the ICE just to have an electric vehicle.
Okay, maybe one more question if we have anything from the audience. Last one, yeah, please go ahead.
Well, I think all the panelists and audience agreed that electrification will take some time. But at the same time, we want also greener cities, also in our region here. Then the question comes to my mind, why we are not introducing and enforcing at least better exhaust emission levels here in our region right away? I mean, taking the example of Saudi Arabia, for example, or Cairo, Egypt. I mean, we are talking about an exhaust emission level of Euro 3 or non-Euro at all. And yet we are talking about electrification of vehicles. I mean, what's the purpose of having an electrified city bus running on streets while on the other side trucks are running on Euro 0 emission level? I mean, so the equation doesn't sum up, in my opinion.
Absolutely. That's a difficult question. I'll deflect that one.
Yeah, actually, thank you for mentioning this. This is when you mentioned, remember when you asked, is there a reason to not electrify? A question that was put by an operator a couple of years back was, listen, I have a fleet of Euro 3. Why don't I just get Euro 6 and, you know, it makes more sense economically, environmentally, maybe, it's not perfect, but I did what I can at that time. He said, like, this is what I can do. So it really depends, in parts of the world, like you mentioned, we're still at Euro 3. Some other places we have Euro 4, some other places we have Euro 5. But the thing is, we need to completely shift that way of thinking. It's not only about the emissions standards anymore. It's about a whole new infrastructure, a whole new framework of thinking that includes energy. And even energy itself, you could claim that electrification can be a justification for governments to say, okay, let's build new gas electric stations. This is not how it works. You need to have a complete green well to wheel, sorry. So you need to be completely efficient for the whole sector. And this is where the right policies come in. This is where the right policies by governments come in to set down, okay, how should we do it exactly? And why is actually electric buses better than a Euro 3 or a Euro 4? Then you say, listen, if you look at the TCO, the total cost of ownership, it actually makes sense. There's no maintenance, there's no مشاريع, the environmental cost, the external cost can be included and should be included. If you change this framework, you will go away from the old school approach of this is a Euro 3, Euro 4, bus. systems approach, new stakeholders, new framework, this is the way forward. And this is where we as countries in the Middle East would look at the, say, Paris Agreement or the NDCs as something that are actually closer to us. If you look at it now, you'd say, these goals and targets, they don't really apply to us. We don't have the right policies, but this is how it starts. We need to have these right policies in mind. And next year, there's a COP in, I think this one will be in Egypt. The next one will be the UAE. So this is how we start deviating from the traditional old school approach and getting more environmentally friendly.
Also, there's this, I think, in the approach of, and I completely agree with you, by the way, like it's a spot on observation where when you see an electric bus passing and then something that's blowing up black smoke passing next to it. But I think there's this kind of like urgency that we need to have, especially in this region, because I think in this region we will be like global warming. When people say it will increase by 1.5, it's, I heard it the other day that if it's if it's 40 degrees here or 40 degrees, what does it matter? It's actually the 1.5 is an average global, right? So and this area, this region is more susceptible to a more dramatic increase in temperature, right? Whereby, like, if you put one hand if you put one of your hands in fire and the other hand in freezing temperature, yes, the average degree is okay, but you've lost both hands, right? So here we have more, if anything, we have more urgency to transform. And I would say that it's like shooting for the moon, and if you miss, you fall among the stars, right? This is the kind of approach we need to have in this region. Otherwise, it will be a much slower transition, because if you're transitioning into a cleaner Euro 6, then you're sinking more capital into that would actually prevent you from transitioning into electric. So if you're making the transition, you might as well go all the way.
Okay. Thank you very much to all our panelists. Thank you very much to the audience for coming today. I hope you enjoyed the rest of the show. And yeah, hopefully we'll see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.